wind was a blade against her cheekbones. Elara huddled deeper into the thin coat, a useless shield against the city's November cruelty. Each gust of wind felt personal, a deliberate shove from a world that had long since turned its back on her. Her fingers, numb and stiff, rested on the worn frets of her guitar. It was her only friend, her only possession of any real value, and its value was purely sentimental. The wood was scarred, the finish worn away in patches where it had rested against her body for 1,000 lonely nights. Her voice was the other thing she owned, and it was failing her. The cold had burrowed deep into her throat, turning her notes brittle and thin. She sang into the indifferent twilight, her breath pluming in the frigid air. The song was a quiet one, a half-forgotten lullaby her grandmother used to hum. It was a song of lost things and safe harbors, a melody that ached with a homesickness for a place that never existed. Her open guitar case lay on the pavement before her. Inside, a few scattered coins glinted dully under the jaundiced glow of a streetlight. Not enough, never enough. Not for a hot meal, not for a room for the night, just enough to remind her of her failure. People hurried past, collars turned up, faces buried in scarves. They were blurs of motion, insulated by their own warmth, their own destinations. Elara was part of the landscape, no different from the grimy brick wall behind her or the trash bin overflowing at the corner, invisible. A tremor started in her hands, a familiar companion. It was born of cold and hunger, but fueled by a deeper, more persistent fear. The fear of him, Marcus. His face swam in her memory, handsome and cruel. His voice, once a velvet whisper of promises, now echoed in her nightmares as a sharp command, a dismissive laugh. He had loved her voice, he'd said, loved it so much he'd wanted to own it, to keep it in a cage just for him. When she sang for herself, he grew angry. When her music brought a smile to a stranger's face, he grew possessive. Her voice was a gift, and he had tried to turn it into a weapon against her. So, she had run. She had packed nothing but her guitar and the clothes on her back, fleeing in the dead of night while his drunken snores filled their small apartment. She had run until her lungs burned, until the city she knew was just a smear of lights in the rearview mirror of a bus heading anywhere else. Anywhere but there. Now, months later, anywhere else. Was this frozen street corner, with an empty stomach and a heart full of ghosts. The song faltered. Her throat closed, tight with unshed tears and the raw ache of the cold. She bowed her head, letting the last note die in the wind. Everything was gone. The hope that had propelled her escape had dwindled to this. A few pathetic coins. A body that was slowly giving up. Maybe he was right. Maybe she was nothing without him. The thought was a cold stone in her gut. She rested her forehead against the cool wood of her guitar, closing her eyes. Just for a moment, just to gather the strength to play one more song. One last try. Julian Thorne walked with the city's rhythm, but he was not a part of it. His suit was immaculate, a dark gray armor of cashmere and wool that held the cold at bay. His shoes, handmade and polished to a mirror shine, clicked with quiet authority on the pavement. He was the CEO of Thorne Industries, a man whose decisions shaped skylines and moved markets. But his heart was a hollow chamber. Beside him, a small hand was tucked firmly into his. Lily, his daughter, his world, his constant, aching reminder of all he had lost. She was 6 years old, with eyes that held the same deep, thoughtful brown as her mother's. Amelia. The name was a phantom limb, an ache that never truly subsided. It had been 2 years since the accident, 2 years of living in a house that was too big, too quiet. 2 years of trying to be both father and mother to a little girl who was growing up in the shadow of a ghost. He was on his way to a dinner he didn't want to attend, with people he didn't want to impress. It was part of the job, part of the life he was supposed to lead. He felt Lily's steps falter. She tugged on his hand, her small body coming to a complete stop. "Lilybug, we have to keep moving," he said, his voice gentle but distracted, his mind already on quarterly reports and shareholder meetings. She didn't answer. She just stood, her head cocked, listening. And then he heard it. A voice, thin and fragile, weaving a melody that cut through the city's cacophony. It was faint, almost lost in the traffic and the wind, but it was there. A song he hadn't heard in 2 years. Amelia's song. The one she would hum while she sketched in her notepad. The one she would sing to Lily in her crib. It was their song, a private, perfect piece of their world. His breath caught. The world of stock prices and boardrooms dissolved, replaced by a memory so vivid it stole the air from his lungs. Amelia, sitting in the sunlit nursery, her dark hair falling over her shoulder as she sang that exact melody to their newborn daughter. Lily's small voice pierced his reverie, filled with a child's simple, profound wonder. "Daddy," she whispered, her eyes wide as she looked up at him. "She sings the song Mommy used to sing." Julian's gaze snapped from his daughter to the source of the music. He saw her then. A woman huddled against a brick wall, looking as if a strong gust of wind might carry her away. She was a fragile sketch of a person, all sharp angles and worn fabric. Her head was bowed over a battered guitar, her face hidden by a curtain of hair. But her voice? Her voice was a flickering candle in the encroaching darkness. It was wounded and weary. But underneath the pain, there was a purity, a raw, heartbreaking beauty that resonated with the grief lodged deep in his own chest. He felt an inexplicable pull, a sense of cosmic intervention he hadn't believed in since Amelia's death. He took a step, then another, Lily's hand still clutched in his. He walked towards the woman, his polished shoes silent on the grimy pavement. He stopped in front of her, his large frame casting a shadow over her and her empty guitar case. Elara felt the shadow fall over her. She tensed, her head snapping up. Her first instinct was fear. A cop telling her to move along. A thief wanting her last few coins. Or worse. She saw a man, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than she had earned in her entire life. His face was unreadable, his expression intense. Beside him stood a little girl with enormous brown eyes, staring at her as if she were a storybook character come to life. Elara's hands tightened on her guitar. She prepared for the dismissal, the coin tossed with pity, the hurried departure. But the man didn't move. He just looked at her, his gaze piercing, as if he were looking past the grime and the fear, directly into her soul. "Where did you learn that song?" he asked. His voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated in the cold air. It wasn't accusatory. It was something else, something she couldn't name. Elara swallowed, her throat dry. "My grandmother," she rasped, her own voice sounding alien and rough. "She used to sing it." The man's expression softened almost imperceptibly. A flicker of pain, of memory, crossed his features. He glanced down at the little girl, who was still staring at Elara with unwavering focus. He looked back at Elara, at her chapped lips and the tremor in her hands. He saw the hollows beneath her eyes, the deep, settled exhaustion of someone who had been running for a very long time. In that moment, a decision formed in Julian's mind. It was illogical, reckless, insane. He was a man who lived by calculated risks and strategic planning. This was neither. This was an impulse, a gut feeling so strong it was a physical force. He couldn't leave her here. He couldn't let that voice, singing that song, simply fade into the cold. "I need someone," he said, the words coming out before he had fully formed them. "For my daughter." Elara stared at him, confused. I don't understand." "The song," he said, gesturing vaguely with his free hand. "I want you to sing it for her. I want you to teach her music." He looked down at the empty guitar case, then back at her face. "I'll pay you. I have a home. It's warm. There's food." The words hung in the air between them. Warm, food, home. They were concepts from another lifetime, a dream she had stopped allowing herself to have. This had to be a trick, a cruel joke. Men like him didn't talk to women like her, not unless they wanted something she wasn't willing to give. She flinched, pulling back slightly. Julian saw the fear flash in her eyes, and he understood. He immediately softened his posture, taking a half step back to give her space. He crouched down slightly, so he was closer to Lily's level, less of an imposing figure. "My name is Julian Thorne," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its boardroom authority. "This is my daughter, Lily, my wife. She passed away. She used to sing that song to Lily." He paused, the confession costing him more than he expected. "My house has been too quiet for too long." He wasn't offering a transaction. He was offering a reason, a piece of his own brokenness. Elara looked from the man's wounded eyes to the little girl's solemn face. Lily hadn't taken her eyes off her. There was no judgment in the child's gaze, only a quiet, hopeful curiosity. Hope. It was a dangerous thing. But what did she have left to lose? Another night in the cold? Another day of hunger? Her dignity was already in tatters. Slowly, fighting every instinct that told her to run, Elara gave a single, shaky nod. A breath Julian hadn't realized he was holding escaped him. "Come with me," he said, his voice gentle. "Please." He stood up, offering her a hand. For a long moment, she just stared at his hand. It was large, clean, and steady. It was a hand that built things, that signed contracts, that held power. It was everything her world was not. Hesitantly, she reached out her own trembling, grimy hand and placed it in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and firm. It wasn't a grip of possession, but one of support. He helped her to her feet, her stiff limbs protesting. Then, without a word, he bent down, carefully closing the lid of her guitar case and picking it up. He was carrying her last possession. He was carrying her. The car was a silent, leather-scented cocoon. It slid through the city streets with a hushed grace that felt alien to Elara. She sat in the back with Lily, her own worn clothes feeling like a desecration against the pristine, cream-colored seats. She was hyper-aware of the dirt under her fingernails, the frayed hem of her jeans. She was a stray brought in from the rain, and she was terrified she would ruin the carpet. Lily sat beside her, not touching, but close. She hadn't said another word, but she kept glancing at Elara, then at the guitar case resting on the seat opposite them. Julian drove in silence, his profile silhouetted against the passing city lights. Elara watched him in the rearview mirror, trying to understand what was happening. This man, This Julian Thorne had plucked her from the gutter on the strength of a song. It didn't make sense. The city's dense core gave way to sprawling avenues, then to quiet, tree-lined streets, where the houses were set far back from the road, hidden behind stone walls and iron gates. Finally, the car turned into a long driveway, gliding towards a house that wasn't a house. It was a monument of glass and steel and stone, glowing with a cool, geometric light. It looked less like a home and more like a modern art museum. It was beautiful and terrifying. Inside, the silence was even more profound. The entry hall was a vast two-story space with a polished concrete floor and a wall of glass that looked out onto a dark, manicured garden. The air was still and smelled faintly of lemon and emptiness. A housekeeper, a woman with a kind but formal face, appeared as if from nowhere. Julian spoke to her in low tones. "Mrs. Gable, this is Elara. She will be staying with us. Please show her to the East Guest Suite, and see that she has everything she needs." The woman, Mrs. Gable, gave Elara a polite, neutral nod. "This way, miss." Elara followed, feeling small and utterly out of place. She clutched the strap of her own guitar, which Julian had handed back to her. It was her anchor in this strange, sterile sea. The guest suite was larger than any apartment she had ever lived in. A bedroom with a cloud-like bed, a sitting area, and a bathroom that looked like it belonged in a five-star hotel. Everything was white, gray, or beige. Perfect, untouched. "A meal will be brought up for you shortly," Mrs. Gable said from the doorway. "And there are clothes in the closet. Mr. Thorne thought you might be in need." Elara just nodded, unable to speak. When the door clicked shut, she was finally alone. She stood in the center of the plush rug, her body rigid with tension. This was a mistake. She didn't belong here. She was a fraud, a grimy street musician trespassing in a palace. She was waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the kindness to curdle into expectation. The first thing she did was take a shower. The hot water was a miracle, washing away weeks of street dirt and despair. She scrubbed her skin until it was raw, as if she could physically remove the memory of the cold. She found the clothes in the closet, simple, soft things. Gray sweatpants, a plain black shirt. They were new, tags still attached. Wearing them felt like putting on a costume, the costume of someone who was clean, safe, and cared for. When the food arrived on a tray, it was a simple soup and bread, but to Elara, it was a feast. She ate slowly, savoring every spoonful, her body trembling with the shock of real nourishment. That night, she lay in the enormous bed, lost in the sea of pillows and high thread-count sheets. But she couldn't sleep. The silence of the house was deafening. It wasn't a peaceful quiet. It was a heavy, mournful silence, thick with things unsaid. She was safe. She was warm. She was fed. And she had never felt more alone. The next few days passed in a strange, muted rhythm. Elara tried to make herself invisible. She stayed in her suite, cleaning it obsessively, making the bed with military precision, terrified of leaving any trace of her presence. She was a ghost in a house already haunted by one. Lily was the gatekeeper. The little girl would appear silently in doorways, her large brown eyes watching Elara with an unnerving intensity. She didn't speak, she just observed. She was testing her, waiting. Elara understood. This was Lily's home. This was Lily's grief. Elara was an intruder in it. She didn't push. She didn't try to force a friendship. When Lily was near, Elara would simply go about her business, moving with a quiet gentleness. Sometimes she would hum, not the song, not yet, just random, soft melodies. One afternoon she saw Lily in the kitchen, pushing a sad-looking piece of broccoli around her plate. The child's face was set in a stubborn frown. Later, Elara found the courage to go into the vast, intimidating kitchen herself. Using the few simple ingredients she could find, she made a small batch of the creamy vegetable soup her grandmother used to make for her when she was sick. She left a bowl of it on a tray outside her own door, then retreated. A few hours later, the tray was gone. The next day, she saw Mrs. Gable in the hall. The housekeeper gave her a small, genuine smile. "Lily enjoyed the soup," she said softly. "She hasn't eaten that well in months." It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. The real breakthrough came a week later. Elara was sitting in her room, trying to tune her old guitar. The strings were worn, the sound dull. She was lost in the familiar meditative task when a tiny sound came from her open doorway. Lily stood there, her lower lip trembling. She was clutching a small, stuffed rabbit. One of its cloth ears was hanging by a single, sad thread. She didn't say a word. She just held it out to Elara, her eyes filled with a child's desperate, silent plea. Elara's heart clenched. She put her guitar aside and beckoned the child closer. "May I see?" she asked gently. Lily hesitated for a second, then took 2 small steps into the room and placed the wounded rabbit in Elara's hands. Elara examined it with grave seriousness. "Oh, this looks serious," she whispered. "But I think we can fix him." She didn't have a sewing kit, but her own sweater, the one she'd been wearing for months, was unraveling at the cuff. Carefully, she pulled a long, dark gray thread free. It wasn't a perfect match for the rabbit's white fur, but it was strong. With painstaking care, she threaded the yarn through the torn fabric, her fingers moving with a delicate precision. She stitched the ear back into place, making the tiny knots strong and secure. Lily watched her every move, her expression rapt. When she was finished, she presented the healed rabbit back to Lily. "There," she said softly, "good as new." Lily took the rabbit, her small fingers tracing the line of dark gray stitches. She looked at the repaired ear, then up at Elara. For the first time, a real emotion broke through her solemn mask. Gratitude. She didn't say, "Thank you." She did something better. She turned and ran from the room, her small feet pattering down the hall. Elara's heart sank a little, thinking she had somehow failed. But a few minutes later, Lily returned. She walked right up to Elara and placed something on the bed beside her. It was a drawing, a crayon drawing on a piece of thick paper. It depicted a stick figure with wild, scribbled hair holding a lopsided guitar. Next to her was a smaller stick figure, and they were both smiling. Over their heads, a bright yellow sun shone. Elara picked it up, her fingers trembling. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. She looked at Lily, her eyes blurring with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. Lily gave a small, shy nod. Then she climbed onto the far corner of the big bed, curled up with her rabbit, and watched as Elara finally picked up her guitar and began to softly play. She played the song, and in the quiet of the big, empty house, a little girl began to hum along. The house had a rhythm of sleeplessness. Elara often found herself awake in the deep hours of the night, when the past felt closer, its claws sharper. The comfort of the bed and the safety of the walls couldn't completely silence the echoes of Marcus's voice, or the phantom chill of the street. One night, thirst drove her from her room. She crept down the sweeping staircase and through the darkened halls toward the kitchen, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. A single light was on, a soft glow spilling from the kitchen doorway. She paused, her heart beating a little faster. Julian was there. He stood in front of the wall of glass, looking out into the impenetrable blackness of the garden. He was in a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, the armor of his suit gone. He looked younger and infinitely more tired. A half-empty glass of what looked like whiskey sat on the marble island behind him. He hadn't heard her. He was lost in his own world. A world she was beginning to understand was as full of ghosts as her own. She should have retreated, left him to his solitude. But something held her there, a sense of kinship. They were two insomniacs, haunted by different losses, sharing the same silent house. "I couldn't sleep either," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Julian started, turning from the window. The guarded mask of the CEO was gone. In its place was just a man, startled and vulnerable. "Elara," he said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "No, it's okay," she interrupted softly. "I was just getting some water." An awkward silence fell between them, thick with the things they didn't say during the day. He gestured towards the glass on the counter. "I'm not a very good host, keeping the good stuff to myself," he said, attempting a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can I get you something?" "Water is fine," she said, moving towards the sink. As she filled a glass, he spoke again, his voice low. She used to love this time of night. "Amelia," she said, the world was finally quiet enough to think. He swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "Now it's just quiet." Elara leaned against the counter, holding her glass of water, the cold seeping into her palm. "The silence is loud, isn't it?" He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "Yes," he said. "That's it exactly." He took a slow sip of his drink. "Thank you," he said, changing the subject, "for what you did with Lily's rabbit." "It was nothing." "It wasn't nothing," he insisted. "That was Amelia's, the rabbit, one of the first things she bought when she found out she was pregnant." He stared into his glass. "Lily hasn't let anyone touch it since Amelia died, and she hasn't drawn a picture in 2 years." The confession hung in the air, a fragile offering. "The song," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "It was the one Amelia was humming in the car, right before—" He trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The story was in the harsh line of his jaw, the pain in his eyes. A sudden, senseless accident, a world shattered in an instant. "She was an artist," Julian said, a sad smile touching his lips. "She saw beauty everywhere, in everything. She would have liked your voice. She would have said it has truth in it." Elara's chest ached with a sympathy that was sharp and deep. He saw her as someone his wife would have liked. He was connecting her to the most precious part of his past. And in that moment of shared vulnerability, she felt a flicker of courage. He had shared his wound. Maybe she could show him a small piece of hers. "He told me my voice was worthless," she whispered, the words tasting like ash. She hadn't planned to say them. They just fell out. Julian's head came up. "He?" Elara wrapped her arms around herself, the glass of water forgotten. "The man I was with, before. He said no one would ever want to listen to me, that I was nothing without him." She didn't say his name. Marcus was a curse she didn't want to speak in this safe, quiet place. He liked it when I was small, she continued, her voice trembling as the memories surfaced. When I was quiet, my music, it made me feel big. It made me feel like me. He hated that. He would break my strings, hide my guitar, tell me my songs were stupid. Her breath hitched. The day I left, I waited until he passed out. I just took my guitar and ran. I didn't know where I was going, just away. Tears she hadn't allowed herself to cry on the street corner now traced hot paths down her cheeks. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance. She was a survivor of a quiet, soul-crushing war. Julian moved without thinking. He closed the distance between them and gently took the glass from her trembling hand, setting it on the counter. Then, he did something that surprised them both. He reached out and rested his hand on her arm. His touch was light, respectful, but it was firm, grounding. "He was wrong," Julian said, his voice a low, fierce growl. "He was a fool and a liar." He looked directly into her eyes, his own gaze burning with a protective anger she had never seen before. It was an anger on her behalf. "Your voice," he said, his voice dropping to an intense whisper, "is the first thing that has made this house feel like a home in 2 years. Your voice brought my daughter back to me." He held her gaze, letting the weight of his words sink in. "You are not nothing, Elara. You are everything." In the quiet of the kitchen, under the soft glow of a single light, 2 broken people stood together, their shared wounds forming a fragile, unspoken bond. He was no longer just a billionaire benefactor, and she was no longer just a charity case. They were Julian and Elara, and they were no longer completely alone in the dark. The fragile peace they had built was shattered by the slick, glossy pages of a magazine. It was a trashy tabloid, the kind found at grocery store checkouts, specializing in the scandals of the rich and famous. Julian rarely appeared in them. He guarded his privacy with the same fierce intensity he applied to his business dealings. But there he was, a grainy, long-lens photo of him, Lily, and Elara walking in the garden of his estate. The headline was a cruel, screaming banner of black and red ink, "Widowed Billionaire's New Mystery. Woman, from homeless to heiress?" Beneath it, a smaller, more insidious line. "She's a manipulative gold digger," claims heartbroken ex. Elara saw it when Mrs. Gable brought in the mail, her face a mask of distress. The housekeeper tried to hide the magazine at the bottom of the pile, but Elara's eyes caught the photo, the flash of her own face. Her blood ran cold. She took the magazine from Mrs. Gable's trembling hands. Her fingers felt numb as she read the article. It was full of lies, twisted half-truths, spun into a narrative of greed and deceit. And then she saw the name, Marcus. He had found her. The article quoted him extensively. He painted himself as the victim, a loving boyfriend abandoned by a cruel, ambitious woman who had used him and tossed him aside. He talked about her instability, her fantasies. He made her sound unhinged, dangerous. He had poisoned her sanctuary. He had reached through time and space to reclaim her, to drag her back into the mud. A wave of nausea and pure, primal terror washed over her. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. The floor tilted beneath her feet. The beautiful, safe house suddenly felt like a trap. The walls were closing in. He would ruin this. He would ruin Julian. He would hurt Lily. All because of her. She was a contamination, a disease she had brought into this clean, quiet world. Her first and only instinct was the one that had saved her before. Run. She fled to her room, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The beautiful clothes, the soft bed, the crayon drawing taped to her wall. They were all part of a life that wasn't hers, a life she was about to destroy. She couldn't let that happen. She couldn't let her past tarnish Julian's name or bring a shadow of darkness near his daughter. She had arrived with nothing but a guitar and the clothes on her back. She would leave the same way. Frantically, she stripped off the soft shirt and pants and pulled on her own worn jeans and threadbare sweater. They felt like her true skin, the skin of someone who runs. She grabbed her guitar, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. She didn't have a bag to pack. There was nothing to take. She was halfway to the door when it opened. Julian stood there. He had another copy of the magazine in his hand, his knuckles white as he gripped it. His face was a storm of fury. "I saw the look on your face," he said, his voice tight. "Don't." "I have to go," she choked out, tears streaming down her face. "Julian, you don't understand. He won't stop. He will destroy you to get to me. I can't let that happen. I can't." She tried to push past him, to get to the door, to the anonymous safety of the streets. He blocked her way, his body an immovable wall. "No, please," she begged, her voice breaking. "Let me go. It's the only way to protect you and Lily." He reached out and gently, but firmly, took the guitar from her hands, setting it down against the wall. Then he gripped her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Listen to me, Elara," he said, his voice low and intense, cutting through her panic. "Do you think I am so weak that a man like that, a pathetic liar in a tabloid, can destroy me? You don't know him," she cried. "He's cruel. He's relentless." "And I," Julian interrupted, his eyes blazing, "am the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar corporation with a legal team that eats men like him for breakfast. He has picked a fight he cannot possibly win." His thumbs stroked her shoulders, trying to soothe the tremors that racked her body. "You have been running from him for months. You have been fighting this alone. You are not alone anymore." The protector he had been on the inside, the grieving man, the gentle father, was gone. In his place was the titan of industry, the man who commanded boardrooms and bent the world to his will. And all of that power, all of that fierce energy, was focused on one thing: her. "I am not letting you go," he said, his voice dropping to a raw, emotional whisper. "I am not letting him chase you out of your home." Her home. He had called it her home. "His fight," Julian declared, his gaze unwavering, "is with me now." He pulled his phone from his pocket, his movements sharp and decisive. He never let go of her shoulder. With his other hand, he dialed. "Arthur," he said into the phone, his voice cold as steel. "Clear my schedule. I want the entire litigation team in my office in 1 hour. I want a full background check on a man named Marcus Vance. I want a restraining order filed by noon. And get our PR head on the line. We are drafting a statement." He listened for a moment, then said, "There is no negotiation. This is not a business matter. This is personal." He ended the call and looked down at her, his expression softening again. He saw the terror still warring with a fragile flicker of hope in her eyes. "You are safe here," he said, as if it were the most fundamental law of the universe. "I will not let him or anyone else ever hurt you again. This is my promise." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly, as the sobs she had been holding back finally broke free. She wept against his chest, for the fear, for the relief, for the terrifying, beautiful fact that for the first time in her life, someone was fighting for her. She wasn't running anymore. She was being defended. She was being protected. She was home. The storm, when it broke, was swift and absolute. Julian Thorne moved with the devastating efficiency of a force of nature. His legal team descended upon Marcus Vance's life like a pack of wolves, unearthing a history of deceit, petty crime, and restraining orders from other women he had terrorized. The narrative Marcus had tried to sell to the tabloids crumbled under the weight of documented truth. But Julian didn't stop there. He didn't want to just win. He wanted to vindicate Elara. He released a public statement. It wasn't a cold corporate denial. It was a personal, impassioned defense. Elara watched it on the news, huddled on the sofa in Julian's study, a blanket wrapped around her. She saw him on the screen, standing in front of the Thorne Industries logo, looking directly into the cameras. He spoke of Elara not as a mystery woman, but as a person of immense courage and integrity. He spoke of her talent, her kindness, and the quiet strength it took to survive the circumstances she had fled. He never named Marcus. He didn't need to. He referred to him only as the source of these malicious and demonstrably false allegations. A man whose actions were now the subject of a serious legal investigation. He ended the statement with a sentence that made Elara's heart stop. "Miss Elara is a cherished member of my household and my family," he said, his voice ringing with unshakable conviction. "An attack on her character is an attack on me, and it will not be tolerated." The world saw a powerful CEO drawing a line in the sand. Elara saw a man building a fortress around her. The hardest part was her own statement. Julian's lawyers explained that her testimony would be the final nail in the coffin for Marcus's credibility and the basis for a permanent order of protection. The thought of facing it, even in the safe confines of a lawyer's office, made her feel sick. It meant giving voice to the ugliness, the fear, the humiliation. Julian sat with her the night before. He didn't push or persuade. "You don't have to do anything you don't want to," he said softly. "I can handle this. But I know you. I know that your voice is your strength. You've been singing your truth since the day I met you. Maybe it's time to speak it too." He was right. Singing was her soul, but speaking was her power. A power Marcus had tried to take from her. It was time to take it back. The next day, in a quiet wood-paneled room, with Julian sitting silently in a chair behind her, Elara told her story. She spoke of the control, the isolation, the way he would belittle her music to keep her small. She spoke of the night she ran, the fear that had been her constant companion. Her voice didn't tremble. It was clear and steady. The voice of a survivor, not a victim. The legal victory was a formality after that. The restraining order was granted. The tabloids printed retractions. Marcus Vance disappeared, swallowed by the legal and financial consequences of picking a fight with a titan. He was gone. A ghost, finally exorcised. A profound quiet settled over the house once more. But it was a different kind of quiet now. It wasn't the sound of absence. It was the sound of peace, the sound of healing. The final barrier between them had been obliterated. The crisis had forged them into something new. A unit, a team, a family. One sunny afternoon, weeks later, Elara was in the garden. It had become her sanctuary within a sanctuary. When she had first arrived, it was manicured and perfect, but lifeless. Now she had planted small patches of wildflowers, chaotic, colorful, and resilient. She was humming, tending to a patch of bluebells, when Julian and Lily approached. Lily ran ahead, her face bright with a joy that was now a constant presence in the house. She was holding a fistful of daisies she had picked. "For the flower family," she announced, placing her daisies next to Elara's bluebells. Julian smiled, watching them. The light caught the silver starting to appear at his temples, but the deep lines of grief around his eyes had softened. He looked at Elara, her face smudged with dirt, her hair tied back loosely, and his heart felt a familiar, long-forgotten warmth. Love. It wasn't the memory of love, but the real, present tense thing. "You've brought this place back to life," he said, his voice full of a quiet awe. "The garden, the house, us." Elara looked up at him, her own heart full. "You gave me a place to plant my roots." They stood in a comfortable silence for a moment, the sound of birds and Lily's happy chatter filling the air. Then Lily, with the simple, profound logic of a child, took Elara's hand in one of hers and Julian's in the other. She looked between them, her expression serious. "Daddy is the daddy, flower, and you're the mommy flower," she stated. "And I'm the baby flower." She paused, a thoughtful frown on her face. "Can you be the real mommy flower, Elara? Can you stay forever?" Elara's breath caught in her throat. She looked at Julian, her eyes wide. His own eyes were shimmering with emotion. He knelt down, so he was on their level, still holding Lily's hand. He never took his eyes off Elara. "That's what I wanted to ask you," he said, his voice thick. "You came into our lives like a song we'd forgotten we knew. You healed us, Elara. You healed this house. You healed my daughter. And you healed me." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple box. It wasn't a flashy, diamond-encrusted affair. He opened it to reveal a simple, elegant ring with a single, perfect sapphire the color of bluebells. "I'm not asking you to replace anyone," he said, his voice raw and sincere. "I'm asking you to be you, to build something new with us, to let me spend the rest of my life protecting you and cherishing you and listening to you sing." He gave her the choice, the power she had never had. "Will you be my wife? Will you be my partner?" He glanced at Lily, his smile, finally, fully reaching his eyes. "Will you make our flower family real?" Tears of pure joy streamed down Elara's face. She looked at the man who had been her rescuer, her defender, her friend. She looked at the little girl who had accepted her, who had healed alongside her. This wasn't a fairy tale ending she had stumbled into. It was a life she had helped build, a love she had earned, a family she had chosen. "Yes," she whispered, her voice full of all the songs she had yet to write. "Yes, I will." The wedding was not a society event. There were no cameras, no reporters, no business associates. It was held in the garden. The guest list consisted of 3 people: Mrs. Gable, who cried quietly into a handkerchief; Arthur, Julian's stern-faced lawyer who actually cracked a smile; and Lily. Lily was the maid of honor, the flower girl, and the ring-bearer. She wore a simple white dress and a crown of daisies she and Elara had made that morning. She walked down the grassy aisle with a seriousness that befitted her many roles, scattering wildflower petals with abandon. Elara wore a simple, elegant dress the color of cream. Julian had bought her a new guitar, a beautiful instrument of gleaming mahogany, and it rested against a chair nearby, a silent guest of honor. Julian didn't wear a tuxedo. He wore a simple linen suit, his tie undone. He looked only at her. They said their vows under a trellis where ivy had begun to grow, their words simple, direct promises, not of forever, but of every day, a promise to be kind, to be patient, to listen, a promise to be a family. When they were pronounced husband and wife, Julian didn't kiss her immediately. He knelt down first, and together they wrapped Lily in a hug, the three of them becoming the center of their own small, perfect universe. The Flower family, real and whole. Months later, the house was unrecognizable, not in its structure, but in its soul. The silence was gone, replaced by the sound of life, the sound of Lily's laughter echoing down the hall, the sound of Elara's guitar, no longer a cry of loneliness, but a joyful expression of peace, the sound of Julian's deep voice reading bedtime stories. The great glass walls no longer looked out onto a sterile, perfect garden. They reflected a home. Lily's crayon drawings, now professionally framed, hung on the walls next to priceless works of art. A scuffed-up pair of Lily's sneakers sat by the door. A half-finished puzzle was spread across a low table in the living room. One evening, Elara sat on the plush sofa, the new guitar resting in her lap. She wasn't playing, just tracing the smooth wood. Lily was curled up beside her, leaning against her side, fast asleep after a long day of school and play. Her small chest rose and fell in a steady rhythm. On her wrist was a small, delicate bracelet Elara had woven for her from colorful threads, a more permanent version of the yarn that had fixed her beloved rabbit. Julian came and sat on the other side of her, careful not to disturb Lily. He didn't say anything, just wrapped his arm around Elara's shoulders, pulling her close. She leaned her head against his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring beat of his heart. She looked around the room, at the warm pools of light from the lamps, at the sleeping child, nestled against her, at the strong arm, holding her safe. She thought of the cold street corner, the biting wind, the empty guitar case. It felt like a story about someone else, a lifetime ago. She had been so broken, a collection of sharp, painful pieces. She thought that was all she would ever be. But she was wrong. Julian had provided the safety. Lily had provided the trust. And she, with her quiet strength and her resilient voice, had provided the music that bound them all together. They had taken their broken pieces and, together, built something new, something whole, something beautiful. Julian pressed a soft kiss to the top of her head, his heart overflowing with a love he thought he would never feel again. He looked at his wife and his daughter, bathed in the warm glow of their living room. The haunting song had brought Elara to them, a melody of loss and longing. But it was the quiet, everyday notes of their life together. The hum of contentment, the rhythm of shared laughter, the harmony of a family's love that had truly composed their happily ever after.